Broadcast and webcast of Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans, is made possible by support from the State of Alaska Office of the Governor. Welcome to Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans. What size should the Alaska government be? What services do Alaskans want or need? And how do we close the fiscal gap between what we want and what we can afford? These are some of the questions and tough problems that will be worked on over the next 3 days. Alaska Governor Bill Walker and Lieutenant Governor Byron Malott have invited people from across the state to convene at the University of Alaska Fairbanks to participate in presentations and facilitated discussions on what Alaskans want government to provide and how Alaskans want to pay for it in the future. Presentations and sessions include a current economic overview of the state, the status of the current budget and looming shortfall, revenue options for the future, and a study of how appropriately to size state government. The governor's goal for these sustainable future conversations is to empower participants to return home and host their own community discussions. Hosting this evening is University of Alaska Fairbanks Chancellor Brian Rogers, a former legislator himself. We'll be hearing from the 3 Fairbanks area mayors, welcomed by the UAF student body president, and addressed by the lieutenant governor and governor. An economic overview of the state will be provided by Gunnar Knapp, director and professor of economics at ICER, the University of Alaska Anchorage Institute of Social and Economic Research. Governor Walker's cabinet members will be on hand to answer questions about their department's budgets and services, and will be listening to the conversations. Legislators have been invited to attend the presentations and observe the dialogue. After the event, attendees will take information back to their communities, continue the dialogue through the summer, and report back to the governor and his administration. The goal of Sustainable Future Conversations is to empower participants to return home as volunteer hosts and conduct their own community discussions and report back to the governor. No.
Past the roundabout, so you'll go up when you get back on the main road, and then you turn right into the
Oh, we got some room over here. Let's go around here.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. For centuries, the Athabascans of interior Alaska gathered at Trothyada, Wild Potato Hill, to discuss the issues of the day. In the words of the late Chief Peter John, this is a place where thinking and working together would happen. 100 years ago, Judge Wickersham designated this as the site for a college, and 60 years ago, the Constitutional Convention delegates came here to write Alaska's state constitution. I'm Brian Rogers, Chancellor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I welcome you here to Trothyada, to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and welcome everyone who is watching on TV and online for this opportunity to think and work together. I have the pleasure of spending the weekend with all of you as we kick off Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans. Please rise for the posting of the colors by the Alaska Native Veterans Association Fairbanks Chapter and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Column left. Hard.
Hi, Mike. How are you? Good to see ya. You did?
Hey. Flag bearer. Prepare to pose. Orders. Pose. Orders. Flag bearer, rejoin formation. Flag detail. Present. Arms.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance.
Order. Arms. Flag detail. File. Face. Flag bearer. Sound off.
Walker, United States Navy, 1973, 1977. John Swan, U.S. Army, 69 to 71. Vietnam, 70 to 71. Old United States Army,
Benno Cleveland, United States Army, 1968, 1970, 69, 70, Vietnam.
Terry Ward, United States Navy, CD, Vietnam, 1967, 68.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are the veterans that came out and posed colors tonight. I would like for you to show your respect and give them a round of applause. All the veterans that have served since time began and through our men and women in uniform today, they sacrificed quite a bit of their lives. We're able to be here tonight because of their sacrifices and their services. That's why I ask that you show your respect and give them a round of applause. That's just due to them. Flag detail. Take a short step back. Flag bearers. One step forward. Left face. Forward heart. You can holler for me one more time.
Please be seated. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly go over safety procedures. If there were an emergency, please exit the room by the lighted exit signs. Proceed to the nearest building exit. There are posted evacuation diagrams, including routes and fire alarm pull stations at the base of the stairway. Exit out to the south. Our emergency assembly area is on the south side of the building between Wickersham Hall and Wood Center. I'd now like to bring to the podium the three mayors of this region, Mayor John Eberhart, City of Fairbanks, Mayor Luke Hopkins, Fairbanks North Star Borough, and Mayor Bryce Ward, City of North Pole.
And thank you, Chancellor Rogers, for the opportunity to welcome this fine group, which includes the governor, the lieutenant governor, first family members, but Alaskans, to our community. It's a seat of local government. It's one of the seats of local government. I'm glad to have the opportunity, of course, to have a approved and funded budget. That's what we do here at local government as elected officials. Many of us, we Alaskans, already have local taxes. And much of those dollars go to pay for schools and other aspects of our community. It's a good thing to do. We do it. We value that because we value the services. And I think we're going to have that discussion here. I hope it continues out through all the communities across Alaska, because that's what we need to do, is share this. But again, this is a major step to keep our community strong. Thank you very much for being here today.
So as Mayor Hopkins said, I'm Mayor Ward, Bryce Ward for the City of North Pole. I'd like to welcome you all to the interior, and it's such a beautiful day out there too. It turned out to be quite nice. One thing I'd like to kind of impart, if you will, a little bit of impartation. Something my parents taught me was that no challenge is really a challenge. It's an opportunity. And I think that really, as a state of Alaska, we have some significant challenges in front of us. But really, those are opportunities. They're opportunities for us to define who we are, and really, I think, probably discover who we are as well. And so today, tonight, this weekend, I want to encourage you to be able to think outside the box, think creatively, really access those areas that you have not accessed before, to try to come up with some of the ideas on how we're going to be able to tackle these issues, these challenges, and make them items of definition for who we are as a state and who we are as individuals. One thing, too, I want to say is that I really appreciate the dynamic group of people that are here today. I think it really speaks to the governor's efforts to try to grab all of the greatness that we have as a state of Alaska. And one thing I thought about on the way in is, and this may be a little bit catchy, but really this is not about politics. This is about what's right for the state of Alaska. This is about what's right for us as citizens and what we want for our future. And so we could maybe sum it up as something like this: no politics, no problem, just progress. So thank you.
All right. All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Eberhart, Fairbanks City Mayor. And I'm glad I'm on a calendar year budget that's currently balanced and only get 4% of our money from the state. When I looked around this room at the experience and stature and recognized so many people, the word that came to me was intimidating. But it's wonderful to be part of this group. If you put the lawyers and politicians only in charge, this would probably be called speeches to Alaskans. So the idea of collaboration, the exchange of ideas is a very good one. And I want to commend the governor and lieutenant governor for putting this together. It's very heartening to see open communication, transparency, and the collaboration and teamwork, first by the transition teams and now by all of us. The unforeseen precipitous drop in the price of oil, I think, was a shock and surprise to all of us. I don't think it's going to bounce back that fast like some people hope it will, but it's going to make us think harder about how do we better diversify the economy, what size government is right for us, what services do we want. There's unlikely, obviously, to be any one easy answer panacea, so all of your input and even way out of the box ideas may prove very important. At the end of the process, we'll have a better roadmap of how we weather the next couple of years, and at the end, we'll be stronger for it. So thank you for allowing us to be here. Thank you very much for your contributions.
At UAF, we have a dynamic and vibrant student body, and I'm sure some of the students who are here over the next few days will be asking lots of questions. Here to welcome you is the president of the student government, Mathew Carrick.
So as Chancellor Rogers said, I'm here on behalf of a student body for UAF, and we as students get really excited whenever anything like this happens here on campus, because we know that universities, among which UAF is one of the finest, are really integral to building a future and to making sure that the future lasts is sustainable. So thank you very much for coming here, and I know I speak on behalf of all students that we hope that we'll have really productive and creative solutions here. So, welcome.
And now please welcome Pastor Derek Dickinson of the Journey Christian Church for the invocation.
Let's pray. Dear God, we come to you today and we are grateful just for the gathering that is here, for the conversations that will occur. Lord, we just know your word says if we ask for wisdom, you'll give wisdom, and we just pray for that as we face immediate challenges and long-term challenges. Lord, I just ask your blessing on each person here, on the relationships here, on the food. Lord, we lift up our military. We ask for special protection for them when they are in harm's way, and we just thank you for their sacrifice and service. Lord, I just thank you for every leader in this room, every person from various walks of life and in different areas, and we just pray that there will be a real creativity and a cooperation and a collaboration that is incredibly productive. I just ask for your blessing on the great state of Alaska. Amen.
Now, most of us have already gathered here, but we do know that there's another plane load yet to arrive. So we're going to begin dinner in the buffet line. We'll have governor's welcoming remarks and our first presentation beginning at 6:50 p.m. So there are two catering lines and both sides of each line, and those in this part of the room can go to the first two lines, those from the back part of the room to the back two lines. Please get your meal, come back, and we'll restart in about 35 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. You know, I sense the energy in this room. It reminds me of the work last November as many of us participated in transition team activities. The buzz is already up at the level that it was partway through that meeting. And so I'm looking forward to a really great next couple of days. I'd like to now introduce the transition team co-chairs, Anna Hoffman of Bethel and Rick Halford of Chugiak and Aleknagik.
It is wonderful to be here. The occasion is great, and the place is great. A lot's happened in the last 6 months, and it's time to touch back on some of our original goals. Obviously, apologize for the imperfect communication that the system provides, but we really have to trust Alaskans with the details of the situation before us. If those details are presented objectively and with the reality that's there, then we can expect help. Without that, that help will be difficult to find. We've spent the last 35 years often ordering at wonderful restaurants with no prices on the menu. Today, we're not just asking people what do they want, but we have to ask, what are you willing to pay for? That's obviously where we're going. One of the things that's important is that we recognize how strongly we can disagree without being disagreeable. And I hope for all of us, myself the most, that I will worry the most about listening well and the least about speaking well.
Qoyana qoyokluti mavdu nomag nidug nilgani lutali webstream ami khwalluk dangbakhchut kun damachpti khwani qoyawek sukluti lagaw jafti mavet. We want to welcome everyone who is listening online and will be participating through the media at this conference here this weekend, and welcome all of you, and thank you again for joining us for this weekend. Tonight we will begin with an overview of Alaska's fiscal facts and choices with Gunnar Knapp. He is the director of the University of Alaska Institute of Social and Economic Research. He'll lay the groundwork for this weekend's work. This presentation is now going up on the governor's website and on 360 North, so Alaskans watching on TV and through the web stream can follow along. The entire weekend is open to the public and to the media to observe with live web streaming on 360 North and interactive online participation through Cover It Live and social media connection with hashtag AKFuture on Twitter. It's on Facebook and email. Here at the UAF campus, your Wi-Fi is AKFuture, so you can download information and we can save on paper. You'll notice that that will be a recurring theme, saving. so we will hear a lot about that this weekend.
The schedule on Saturday and Sunday include facilitated small groups. The discussions and presentations will be an opportunity for Alaskans to focus on the sustainable future. At 2:45 on Saturday, Alaska Department of Revenue Commissioner Randy Hoffman will provide an overview of revenue options and demonstrate a new interactive model that participants at UAF and online can be able to use as we delve into revenue discussions and options.
And to save on money, participants paid for their travel to Fairbanks and are staying at the UAF dorms. Our governor and first lady, the lieutenant governor, and Ms. Malat are all staying at the dorms here on campus. More than a dozen legislators have accepted the invitation to come and to listen to the discussions that end on Sunday, and we thank you all for being here. And our final general session will also live stream on 360 North TV and ARCS beginning at 1 p.m. on Sunday.
This is just the start of a discussion that we hope will continue throughout the state. All the general sessions that are web streamed live will be archived online for Alaskans to use at home when they host or deal with conversations in their own communities. The entire production will air multiple times over the summer on 360 North beginning next Saturday, June 13th. At this time, I get the great honor to introduce someone with the energy of youth and the wisdom of age who brought us here. He had the foresight to make a very difficult decision, 8 or 9 months ago, and choose the next governor for the state of Alaska. He is someone who has recognized the grace of influence and how much more important it can be than the power that sometimes is exercised more easily. His dedication, his finesse, and his persistence are absolutely outstanding. Byron Malat brings us the first Alaskan statewide office holder, and we are incredibly proud and thankful for what he has done to bring us here now.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Anna. As the governor and I were sitting there watching both of you, we didn't say it about you, Rick, but I leaned over to him and I said, I love Anna more than you do. And he looked at me and said, I don't think so. The leadership that you have given us and your ability to help bring Alaskans together is so very, very much appreciated. I'd like to say that we hope that this is the beginning of a dialogue that you will think consciously of during these several days as to how you can help take it to your communities, your places, your friends, those people, those institutions that you believe are vitally necessary to helping make the kinds of decisions, very critical decisions, that Alaska has to make in these coming months and years. I have a hard time biting my tongue, and I can certainly stand here and give my sense of what the state should be doing at this, again, very critical time. But I want only to say this. At this historic moment, regardless of the kinds of fiscal decisions we make, we will, in large part, take Alaska in one of two directions. The decisions we make, and more importantly, how we as Alaskans implement them, make them happen, bring us together in support and respect and understanding, will determine in many ways the future of our state. We will either be a state in which we believe that we can be a society divided and still somehow make progress. That we can let the passions of ideology, that we can let the passions of stark, powerful, personally held beliefs become the drivers of public policy. Or we can begin to say that in this incredible place, this land, this other country, this most beautiful place on the face of the earth can create the most beautiful society on the face of the earth by Alaskans working every day to bring us as peoples together. That we can, by the utilization of the critical times we face, do it in a way that makes us one. That makes us one, not that we don't disagree, not that we don't share and shape and build our own place in that overall society, but that we have the ability as Alaskans to respect the voice, the values, the beliefs of others. That we have the ability to say to those that we disagree with most passionately on issues that we hold very dear and personal. We can disagree, but we must come together to make the decisions that build a better Alaska for every single one of us. And to me, the touchstone will be not just a vibrant economy, not just strong communities, not just infrastructure that meets the needs of Alaska's peoples and our economy, not just the vibrancy of an educational system like the university, not just regions that finally understand and work and consciously create connections to make Alaska the best place possible, but that ultimately we will be judged by history as a place in which Alaska did all of that, but it did it by ultimately respecting one another, even when we disagreed. That we said in our public policy, in the kind of society we build in this state, we will constantly reach to the least amongst us. That we will not forget that ultimately a society is measured by how it treats every single one of its citizens. Not by government reaching or overreaching, but by us collectively as a government, because that's ultimately who and what a government is. It is us in the way that we reach out to one another. And if history can say about Alaska, and we have the incredible opportunity to do it in this huge, vast land of such richness with a small population, all of us connected in so many incredible ways, knowing that we have to come together in order to really survive and prosper in this land. And for the first time in American history, at least in our historical memory, a governor who serves only Alaskans, a governor who has said, who ran, who reached out, who built a vision around the notion that it's just about Alaskans. We can do it. And if we continue to remember that history will judge us by how we treated one another and how we carried the least amongst us to a place of opportunity, we will have done good. And the underlying decisions we made in terms of fiscal mechanisms, in terms of tax structure, in terms of policies to building and treating with one another economically, they by themselves would never have allowed history to judge us in the way we should be judged and measured, but by the way we used all of that to bring Alaskans together and reach out to the least amongst us and say, we are all included. Thank you so much. The one thing that I wanted to end with was this. During the course of the campaign, I became so used to introducing Bill Walker that I have almost bridled in every event since where another had taken that opportunity from me. But in this instance, who's going to go up against this woman? So here's Anna Hoffman to introduce Governor Walker.
Gunnar Knapp. And it is truly my honor to have this opportunity to introduce the governor. This weekend, we have been invited to gather and learn about and talk about our values. Through that discussion, we hope to find ways to align our values in order to enhance common goals and objectives for the state. It may feel like a daunting task, but last September, when I was moose hunting with my family on the Takatna River, I was truly inspired when I heard about two men who aligned their values to achieve a greater goal for our state. That step took courage, humility, and trust. We are so privileged to have these two men leading our state, and I could not think of two better men to be leading our state at this time. With great pleasure, I would like to introduce to you our Governor, Bill Walker.
Thank you very much. I thank you very much for Byron. That was very, very inspirational. It was very Byron. I just can't thank you enough for being who you are and allowing me to be part of this journey. I want to thank you very much for the, I remember hearing the story in your, of that hunting trip and how you had to go someplace up a hill to get coverage and then in order to find out what happened and the result and whatnot, and your son did. And I thank you, everyone, for being here. I cannot thank you enough. I will thank you throughout the weekend. It is the most overwhelming thing I think I've done is to invite people to come in a beautiful weekend to Fairbanks on a beautiful weekend in Fairbanks to be part of this. I'm just so humbled. We are so humbled by this. You know, this weekend is not going to be just about balancing budgets. It's going to be talking about the future of the state. It's going to be talking about what kind of a future do we want for our children and our grandchildren? What kind of a legacy do we want to leave? So it's really, there'll be lots of numbers, and Commissioner Hopbeck will do a great job of discussing that, and we'll have an opportunity to interact, but it really is beyond that. Some people see numbers and dollar signs. I see faces. I see faces of children, of grandchildren, of workers, of jobs, so behind it's not just numbers, it's much more than that. You know, I want to thank some people worked really hard and are working really hard this weekend to make this happen. I think that Byron and I probably have the easiest job of this weekend in comparison to what others have done. I want to thank Claire. Where's Claire? Claire, could you stand up? Claire Richardson. She has been phenomenal. She has absolutely been phenomenal. I don't want to begin naming all the who all is working with Claire in this event. Those that are working with Claire, please stand up. I know she's got an army of people, and maybe they're all back here. I don't know where they are, but there's been an army of people that have been working with Claire. There they are in the back. Thank you very much, Melissa, Deborah, Sydney. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for just absolutely phenomenal. University of Alaska Fairbanks Chancellor Brian Rogers, I was just reminded that you did this in 2004. So we're going to here we are again. So thank you very much for all your work and effort and that has gone into this. I want to thank the Thanks to Explore Alaska, who worked very hard on this, and the entire the Fairbanks North Star Borough. Mayor Hopkins, thank you for the work you did. Last night when I checked into my dorm room, there was a gift basket and whatnot, and I appreciated that. How many people are in the dorms? Awesome, awesome. Look at that. I heard that I talked with Bill Corbis a bit about in the dorms. So I know that somebody's going to have a party tonight in the dorms, and be sure you let us know where it is. Bill and I would like to know. It's I was saying today that last night when I went to bed, it was the earliest I've ever gone to bed in a dorm room. So it's great to be on campus, and this isn't by happenstance that we are where we are. It was, we had original transition process with the UAA, and thank you very much for those that were able to participate in that. And we talked about having this event. We said, well, let's have it at UAF, and we're going to have it the first week in June. They said, well, why UAF? I said, well, why not UAF? This is the, I don't know if anybody, kind of the mothership of the university as far as in my background and memory. So let's come to Fairbanks. And by the first weekend in June, the legislature will have been out for a couple of months at that point. So it'll be, have that break, Well, we did come to Fairbanks, and so we got one of those. But the university has just really gone all out for this. I mean, really, really have. So I appreciate that. They say that one of the fundraising events we're going to have is we're going to auction off fans tomorrow night for those in the Wickersham Hall. I understand it gets a little bit warm there, so good luck on that. The legislators that are here, thank you very much. Could you stand? Could you thank you very much for being here? I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. This is going to be a great experience for Alaska, and I'm glad you'll be part of that. So thank you very, very much for doing that. As the price of oil continued to drop, we began to continue to scramble as far as, the first 6 months haven't been the 6 months that Byron and I thought we were going to have. We had all these things planned of what we were going to do, and it was quite a scramble to deal with that. We have finally had a chance to catch our breath a bit and come back to you as Alaskans to say, here we are, here's where we are. We decided that we were not going to sit on the third floor in Juneau and make decisions about the future of the state. We wanted to come to Alaska, invite Alaskans to come and have a discussion about what our options are. And our options are many, and as you will find out, we'll first describe what kind of an Alaska we want, that we want not just for us, but want for the future. We need to talk about the next 20 years, the next 50 years, where do we want Alaska to be in 50 years, and then how do we get there? And so it's a daunting task for a couple of days, but it's time to have that discussion, and it will be a discussion. And as Rick said, the goal is to take this out back to the public and continue this discussion. The discussion starts here. So that's our goal, and that's what we hope you do. Byron talked a bit about the shared vision, and we certainly have that. I remember during the AFN last year, Marion Aarons is right out here somewhere. The theme was Rise as One, and it was a great message. It was a great theme, and I think that's what we want to do with Alaska. No, we won't all agree. That's and that's good that we don't all identically agree. But you all do agree on one thing, and that we will rise as one, as one state. And I'm a big believer that we will be talking to each other and not about each other or past each other, pointing fingers. This is not that type of a gathering. This is a gathering, and I don't expect there'll be anything but a healthy discussion about the different options. At the transition process last November, we had people in groups that We had to coach a few of them back in. They come back out, I've never sat at the same table with that individual, and I'm not sure I'm going to now. And I said, no, you got to go back in and sit down. And some of the responses we got back from some of the groups, it was so heartwarming about how different groups were talking amongst themselves on total different sides of issues. And at the end of the day, realized that they actually had more in common than not in common. And that's what happens when you have a conversation. That's what happens when you listen. I will be joining, Rick in this as being good listeners. Somebody asked me on a recent interview, what will my role be? Byron's my role in this process. Really, is largely to listen. This will be the most I will be saying in this process. At the end, we'll have some wrap-up comments, but we'll be listening. We'll be participating in the discussion, but we've not asked you to come here so we can sell you a product or to lecture to you or convince you that A, B, C, and D is the right way to go and the rest are the wrong way to go. That's not what it's about at all. You're going to know what we know. We're here at the same time as far as what the options are. So it's going to be very exciting. Today I had an opportunity to do something that was also very exciting. I spent a little bit of time in North Pole at a groundbreaking for an interior gas utility, and that was a very awesome event. And while at that, I had an opportunity to fuse together 2 pieces of pipe, and there was as part of my ceremony. Actually, I've got the pipe right over there. If you, it's one that's it's signed by all the mayors that were there. The IGU. Thanks, Ed. And it was you heat it up, you melt it, you put it together. Now you're probably wondering what in the world I'm talking about this. This is we want to bring Alaska together. I did make a little comment about the House and the Senate bringing it together. I did make a comment in a very positive way. It was not in any way a negative way, but as a wonderful trial attorney, a friend of mine here sometimes begins his closing arguments. Here's the deal. The deal is we do need to come together. We do need to talk to each other. We need to stop talking past each other. We need to talk amongst ourselves about what the solutions are. The solutions are there. An advantage some of us had, born in Alaska with the price of oil at $0. And now we're at $60, and I'm happy at 60. It was 43, so it's 60. So, it's a matter of sort of reaching back to be what we used to be, and reaching back to say it's okay to have, I had so many people stop me in airports and say, put back on the school tax. Of course, that was $10 out of the first paycheck, I think is the way that works. So that doesn't get you very far anymore on the $10. But the Alaskan is waiting to say, let's solve this problem. We want to solve this problem. We don't want to continue to draw down on the savings. We could build a new school every 3 days based on what we're drawing down on savings. That's not the Alaska that we want to be in. We want to be in an Alaska that we are balanced and we are making savings, and yet we have the educational system, we have the school system, we have the economy that we want. I had an incredible opportunity a few weeks ago to go to the North Slope. And I think at this point, people are getting a little tired of me talking about the North Slope. But I tell you what, it was so much fun. I was back in my element. I was wearing a hard hat. I was climbing up on drill rigs. I was sitting in the money seat on the drill rig where you actually, drill the well. It was off the charts exciting. I can hardly wait to go back. We're going to go back. We're going to figure out how to get our cabinet back there. Our industry, we need to diversify our economy, but we need to make sure that we that we have a healthy, that we're working hard on bringing our natural resources to Alaskans. I won't start talking about the gas pipeline, or we'll be here the entire weekend listening to me talk about the gas pipeline. But just trust me, we're gonna have a gas pipeline in this administration. We're gonna build a gas pipeline in this administration. We didn't do this for anything but. So how do we get there? We get there by putting aside our differences. We get there by putting aside our past, and we start looking towards the future. And that's what we're going to do this weekend. I also had an opportunity to we need to control our own destiny. I had an opportunity to share that concept with the governor of the state of Washington last week as well, about how we need to control our own destiny, and he doesn't need to necessarily write letters to the Secretary of Interior trying to tell us what we should do in our state. But it is about us controlling our destiny and us having that discussion. So we have people here from all walks of life, all walks of industry, and that's exactly what we need. There was a lot of effort put into, and very difficult, because there could be 10,000 people here easily. So to pare this down was a real difficult challenge, but we did because we had to, because we can only have so many in this process. But we're going to talk about things that are uncomfortable, and we're going to talk about things that are comfortable. And so it's going to be an opportunity for Alaskans to sort of be Alaskans. And not be, there'll be no partisan, Byron's my caucus, you're our caucus, whether you like it or not. We don't have a caucus, you're our caucus. Alaska is our caucus. So we reach out to you and as one, and we will rise as one. This is about our future, this is about our state, and it's about our children and grandchildren's future. So I again, thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to be here, for the participation. There'll be probably a little bit of follow-up from this, as typically we do. We follow up and check back. Some of the groups that came together in the original session still meet electronically and share thoughts on various things. So you are such a critical part of this process. Obviously, we couldn't do it without you. So thank you very, very much for your commitment to be here. Thank you for what you're going to do. And we look forward to an incredible weekend here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And again, Bill Corbis, is it in your room tonight, in the dorm room? That was going to be somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for setting the stage, setting the tone for the discussions of the next 2 days. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gunnar Knapp, the Director of the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of Alaska Anchorage. Gunnar got his PhD from Yale in 1981, came up here as a faculty member, has done economic research, fisheries research here in Alaska, worked on a variety of topics, and he'll set the stage for Alaska's Fiscal Facts. Please welcome Gunnar Knapp.
You got a clicker. The hardest part of this whole thing is figuring out how to use the clicker, and I'm going to have to refer to my notes, namely this presentation, and to do that I'm going to have to move this flag a little so I can see it. Thanks. Hi folks, my name's Gunnar Knapp. I'm Director of the Institute of Social and Economic Research, or ISER, down at the University of Alaska Anchorage. And it's really a pleasure and honor to be here, and it's really a pleasure to be here in Fairbanks on such a beautiful, beautiful spring afternoon. I don't know why this weather is always nicer here than in Anchorage. Doesn't seem fair. Anyway, I've really had a fabulous opportunity throughout my career to spend my entire professional career studying Alaska and studying Alaska's economy and society as part of my job at the Institute of Social and Economic Research. And part of what I've been doing all this time, or for a large part of it, is teaching a course at the university about Alaska's economy. And as part of that course, I've tried to figure out how to explain to students how our fiscal system works. What are our revenues, what's our spending, and what are the opportunities and challenges that this has created for us over time. And so as we have found ourselves facing a new kind of fiscal challenge over the past 6 months for a sort of suddenly accelerated challenge, I've tried to figure out, well, what's a way I can explain this to Alaskans? And so here is my best shot at that. Okay, here's the chat. Okay. Oops, I guess that's not what I do. How do I make it? Oh, this way. Okay. As I think everybody knows, we face in Alaska a significant fiscal challenge. And what I'm trying to do in this presentation is to help Alaskans understand the most important facts about this fiscal challenge and about the choices that we face. And I've divided the presentation into two parts. And the first part is what I consider to be some of the most just important facts you need to understand just to begin to have the conversation. And part two is my attempt to describe what I see as the basic choices that we're facing. And I might say that there's a ton of people in this room who are very, very knowledgeable about this topic, and a lot of people might have chosen slightly different facts or might have presented it in a different way, might present the choices in a different way, and I acknowledge this is a complicated question, and so I'm trying to squeeze a lot into a little bit of time. So let's begin with facts. And I want to talk about state revenues, state spending, and our state savings. Now, I want to start with a basic clarification. When you talk about Alaska's revenues, the state actually receives many different kinds of revenues which we can use in different ways. And most of this conversation about our fiscal challenge is about what we call unrestricted general fund revenues. Those are the revenues that pay for most of state government. And those are the revenues that we can use in any way that we wish. And this year, in FY15, which we're coming up to the end of, we have about $2.2 billion in unrestricted general fund revenues, as shown in red. Now, Alaska's state government also receives a number of other kinds of revenues, which are called, which we call restricted revenues. And we can't use those in any way that we want. How we use them is restricted either by law or by custom. And we actually have $7.4 billion of those kind of revenues that we're spending this year, but they're restricted. So for example, the state is getting $3.1 billion from the federal government, but we have to use that for specific federally funded projects like highways and so on. And then we have permanent fund investment revenue, or the permanent fund earnings. That has certainly historically been considered restricted by custom. It's not money the legislature normally goes to. We have charges for services like the tuition that the university collects, or that the marine highway fares and so on. And then a variety of other revenues that are all restricted. But most of the conversation is about the unrestricted general fund revenues. Okay, if we talk about those unrestricted general fund revenues, we have been extremely dependent on oil revenues to fund our state government. Over the period 2005 to 2014, oil revenues accounted for 90% of our unrestricted general fund revenues. We've been overwhelmingly dependent on oil. How am I doing? Okay. Now, our oil revenues are extremely sensitive to oil prices. When oil prices change, our oil revenues change. And this graph, which is based on Department of Revenue data, illustrates how the oil revenues that we would get in FY17, that's not this next fiscal year, but the following fiscal year, how they would vary for different potential oil prices, all the way from $60 a barrel up to $130 a barrel. Now, I want to point out a couple things we should be aware of. First of all, oil prices particularly make a difference at price ranges between above $80. Okay? When you get up to, if you go from $80 to $90 or from $90 to $100, a $10 per barrel change in average oil prices over the years changes state revenues by more than $800 million. So, what that means is every dollar change in the price of oil changes how much money we get by an average of $80 million. Okay, so prices really, really matter. Now, if you look at prices below $80, say in the $60 to $80 range, you'll see the revenues don't change as much as the oil price changes. And that's the bad news and that's the good news. So it's the good news in the sense that you'll recall the prices didn't go down to $80 this year. They went down to 60, 50, 40. The good news is that once they fell below 80, we weren't losing as much money as they kept falling. The bad news is a lot of us have been watching, we're going, oh, great, great, the prices are up. They're up from 40 up to 50 up to 60. But the bad news is until they get up to about 80, we're not going to get that much extra revenue. Now, this graph basically tells the bad news that we encountered this year. This year, oil prices fell drastically and unexpectedly. None of the so-called experts saw it coming. Really, right at the beginning of this fiscal year, the oil prices began just falling drastically, and they fell by more than half and have since come back up to the low 60s dollars per barrel. In the last legislative session, just over a year ago, when the legislature was planning, making the budget for what we would spend this year, they were expecting, based on the Department of Revenue's forecast, that the price of oil would average $105 for the year. But instead, we had this drastic fall in prices, and the most recent projection is that we will average just $67 a barrel. And you remember how sensitive our revenues are to the price, which is why this cost us a ton of money when the prices fell like that. And mostly because of this fall in oil prices, our oil revenues, which in this graph are shown in red, have fallen drastically. Our oil revenues have fallen drastically. We've seen a tremendous amount of revenue we expected to be getting. Billions and billions of dollars has just evaporated. We're not getting money that we had been getting and were expecting to get. If we go back to compare our revenues this year with 2012, our revenues are down $7.2 billion. That's an 81% drop. Now, it's not only the price of oil. There's been other factors that have played a role. For example, our oil production has fallen, and costs, the deductible costs that producers can deduct from their taxes and credits and a variety of other things have also played a role. And we could spend all evening talking about that. But the main thing is it's mostly the price of oil that has driven this and put us in this drastically lower revenue situation. Now, here's a complicated graph, and I apologize, but study hard because it'll be on the test. This graph, the top line, it's a red line, and it shows the numbers I just showed you. It shows you our total state revenues. And you can see that they were rising up, trending upwards and really rising up through 2012, and then they really drastically fell, okay? And then the blue line shows what we were spending, our general fund spending. And you can see that as our revenues were rising, our spending was rising too. We were earning more money, and we said, hey, we finally got a lot more money, and we started spending a lot more money. But as the revenues were rising, we didn't spend it all. We saved a lot. We saved a lot of money as as our revenues were rising from 2005 to 2012. We ran big surpluses, which are shown by those green bars, and we saved that money in savings reserves. However, beginning in 2013, we didn't cut our spending anywhere near as fast as our revenues, and so we began to run large deficits. Those are the deficits shown by those red bars. The deficit we are running this fiscal year, the fiscal year that's just a month away from ending, is absolutely huge. We're spending $6.1 billion, but we're only taking in $2.2 billion, which leaves us with a $3.9 billion deficit, or 63% of our spending we're not paying for out of our revenues, we're just dipping into our savings to pay for it. How big is that per Alaskan? We're spending $8,000 per Alaskan, we're only taking in $3,000 per Alaskan. So our deficit, $5,200 per Alaskan. That's the size of the problem. Well, these are the numbers for this fiscal year, the year we're in. Now, the legislature has been at work in a very difficult session trying to figure out, well, how can we reduce spending? And so they've made a lot of difficult, tough decisions, and they've taken a lot of heat, and they have significantly cut spending. You can see our total spending is down from $6.1 billion this year. The budget for next year will be about somewhere in the range of $5.3 billion. Obviously, we don't know exactly what it will be. And that has not been easy. But if you look at the graph, you see next year our projected revenues are still just $2.2 billion. So even with these big cuts that we've taken, we still face a huge deficit next fiscal year, FY16. Now, this is the same graph I showed you earlier, but I've extended it out about 8 more years. The Department of Revenue has made projections of how our revenues are likely to change going forward. And the good news is that they are projecting that rising oil prices are going to lead to higher revenues in FY17 and beyond. And so, again, if you're wondering where this is on the graph, look at the bottom right. It's the red line, sort of the projected red line going forward. So you can see they're projecting that we're going to get significantly higher revenues. But the blue line, I've drawn a straight line across. That shows, suppose we continued to spend at the budget that is, probably going to be passed for FY16, the next fiscal year, $5.3 billion. Suppose we continued to spend at that amount and take in this amount of revenue. We would still be running, the size of the deficits would decline, but they would still be very large deficits. So if we take the revenue the improving revenue situation that is being forecasted and compare it with even our reduced level of spending, it still leaves us with big deficits. So how have we been paying for these deficits? Well, remember I talked about how we accumulated those surpluses in savings accounts. And the two major savings reserve funds that the state has, or had, are the Constitutional Budget Reserve Fund, which is shown in blue at the bottom, and the Statutory Budget Reserve Fund. And as we accumulated those surpluses, we deposited a lot of money in these reserve funds. And now, as we've been running deficits, we are taking money out of those reserve funds to pay for them. And so you can see that the Statutory Budget Reserve Fund is going to be completely wiped out by the withdrawals from that that are taking place this year. And if we project ahead the level of deficits that I showed you in the previous graph, the level of deficits we would have at the projected revenues if we continue to spend at the current levels, those deficits would use up all of our savings funds by FY22. In other words, if we're going to start FY16 with $10.1 billion in these savings. And if we run, you can't run very many years of $3 billion deficits or even $2 billion deficits on that level of savings. So, unfortunately, the news is tougher than that. Because the department, let's think about the Department of Revenue's projections for future state revenues and how they're projected to rise significantly. Well, what's that based on? It's based on a number of complicated things they have to take into account. But the most important factor is what's going to happen to oil prices. And so their projections are based on assumption that oil prices are going to rise quite sharply beginning in FY17, and they're going to go up to about $110 by 2020 and up to over $120 a barrel by 2024. Those are the underlying assumptions driving those projected future revenues. But if you study the oil market, and if you read and listen to what people who sort of spend their lives immersed in oil markets are talking about, you will find that many oil market analysts think it's highly unlikely that oil prices will actually rebound as high as the Department of Revenue's projections assume. And a lot of analysts are predicting that prices won't rise above some number, say, in the $70 to $100 range. A lot of people are saying we're not going to see $110 prices. We're not going to see $124 prices. We're not even going to see $100 prices. Okay, this is, and why are they saying that? Well, we could spend the whole evening or the whole weekend talking about this and bring in a bunch of experts, and they wouldn't really know because it's so uncertain. But the basic driving factors relate to the way, what's driving the world oil market and world oil prices. What drove the prices down was oversupply. World production of oil had just expanded very rapidly, and it couldn't support the prices we were getting. And now the prices have fallen, and what you would think would happen would be that the low-cost producers say, I can't afford to operate at $60 a barrel, so I'll shut down production and wait till the prices get back, can go back up to $100, $110, $120. But the problem with that scenario is that the more the oil analysts look at things, the world's oil producers have the capacity to bring back in a tremendous amount of expanded production at prices significantly lower than $100. For example, the lower 48 shale oil. And so if you start getting up to a high price, all these people come back into production, or production expands more, and it keeps your price from getting back up to where it might have been. And another factor that people are talking about is just world oil consumption, or growth in consumption. Demand is declining for a variety of reasons. People are getting into alternative energy sources, more fuel-efficient cars, and there's all kinds of efforts on the horizon where governments are going to specifically try to get us to reduce our carbon emissions. And all these things add up to, a lot of people think, lower prices going forward than we've seen in the past or than we saw back in 2012. Now, here's the reality we have to live with in Alaska. We don't know what will happen to oil prices. We just don't know. We were completely surprised by what happened in the first, at the beginning of this year. We've been completely surprised many times in the past, for good and for bad, and we will doubtless see more surprises. But I would suggest to you, we cannot count on oil prices miraculously rising to some new unprecedented level. And it's probably pretty unlikely. So what I want to do now is something that is something professors get away with, and this is sort of what I inflict on my students. I'm going to show you 4 kind of complicated graphs to make one important point. So I said, well, what would happen, what are we talking about if prices don't rise as high as the Department of Revenue is predicting? And so I said, let's imagine 7 different future oil price scenarios. And so the one is, the top one in red is what the Department of Revenue's most recent forecast was of the prices going up. But suppose the prices stopped rising after they got to $110, or suppose they stopped rising after they got to 100, or after they got to 90, or suppose they just stopped at 60 and didn't rise at all. What would happen to our revenues if those things happened? And here is what the Department of Revenue is saying we could expect for future revenues if oil prices were at those different levels. Okay, they analyzed, using the same assumptions about the oil production and the other things that affect prices, and said if you had these alternative price scenarios, you can see the lower the price, the significantly lower amounts of revenue we would have in the future. Okay, and you also see something important, really important. You see that those lines trend downward in the future? Why do they trend downward? They trend downward because the most likely scenario for our future oil production, particularly if oil prices stay low, is that our oil production will continue the long-term decline that it's been in. So if oil prices don't rise as much as predicted, we'll have significantly lower revenues going forward. Well, what would that mean for the size of deficits we'd be facing? Well, suppose you were spending $5.3 billion and you just kept that the same and you had these different revenues, the red line on the bottom shows the deficits that we're looking at if the Department of Revenue's forecasts come true, but at lower prices we would have significantly higher deficits going forward. We can hope the prices will be as good or better than the Department of Revenue forecast and that the deficits will be this low or lower. We can hope that, but we could be facing significantly bigger deficits if prices are lower. And finally, what would that mean for how quickly we might drain through our savings reserves? Well, depending on the price scenario, the lower the price, the bigger the deficits, the quicker you run through your savings reserves. And so we could hope that the prices will be good, our revenues will be better, our deficits will be lower, and we'll have till 2021 or longer. But if prices are lower, we could run through our savings reserves much quicker. Okay. So that's a lot about revenues. Now I want to talk a little bit about some facts about spending and savings. And this is just the beginning of an introduction, and we're going to have some other speakers, Pat Pitney and others, who will talk more details about some of our spending. But here's just the basic overview. When people divide up the state general fund budget, they divide it into 3 categories: the capital budget, the statewide operations, the capital budget shown in yellow at the top, the statewide operations budget, which is shown in the light blue, and the agency operations budget, which is shown in the dark blue. So the capital budget, what's that? That's roads and buildings and so on. And this graph shows all the way from 2005 to projected through 2016. So that FY 2016 is sort of the estimate of where this year's budget is likely to end up. If you look at the capital budget, you can see that as our revenues went up, we had some pretty darn big capital budgets. We had a couple years where we had capital budget spending of close to $2 billion, right? But as our revenues have gone down, we have drastically cut those capital budgets. This year, FY16 is projected to be down to just a bare bones $100 million. Okay, so that capital budget went up, and now it's gone way back down. And then I'm going to skip ahead next to the what's called the agency operations budget. That's the budget that pays for the various state agencies. And we've got about 16 different agencies, and like the University of Alaska is an agency, the Department of Education and Early Development is an agency, Fish and Game is an agency, legislature is an agency, all these different agencies, okay? So this is the budget that pays for them, and you can see that that budget went up, rose pretty considerably from 2005 to 2015, but now it's projected to be cut back pretty significantly this year, next fiscal year. But I want to show you another way of looking at that. Suppose you think, well, how much, suppose we adjust for the inflation that's occurred and the population growth that's occurred in terms of what we're spending on the agency operations per Alaskans in terms of the actual purchasing power. You can see that it didn't really rise very much, and now with the cut this year, we're pretty much back to the FY 2005 spending level per Alaskan in terms of the purchasing power. Now, what is that agency operations budget in more detail? Well, here are all the different agencies, and you can see sort of what is the FY 15, that's this year, what is the budget of all the different agencies? And two of these agencies, Education and Early Development and Health and Social Services, together account for 59% of all the agency operations budgets. And all the others account for 41%. Third place is University of Alaska, fourth, Corrections, fifth, Transportation, and so on. But a huge part of the agency budget is in education and health. Now, here's the same graph, except I've divided into two parts so you can see where's the growth been since 2005. And so the dark blue on the left is what the budget of those agencies were in FY06, and then the lighter part on the right is what's the growth that occurred. And the point I want to make is that growth occurred in all these agencies' budgets. It wasn't all just concentrated in one particular agency. And explaining this growth in more detail is really complex, and Pat Pitnew, I'm sure, will tell us more about this and others, but I won't take the time to do so now. One last part of the budget I want to talk about is the so-called statewide operations budget. This is basically the part of the budget that's not capital spending, and it's not the agencies, it's the other things. It's money we spend that is sort of basically paying money out, but not attributable to any particular government function. So what does this agency operations budget consist of? Well, it has three main components. One of them is debt service. We're paying about $200 million a year in debt service. Another part that has grown rapidly in the past few years is oil tax credits, for which we pay out cash for certain kinds of tax credits. And another significant portion is retirement fund contributions. Okay, now finally, to wrap up these facts, I want to talk a little bit about the permanent fund. So we have a permanent fund. We're blessed to have a permanent fund that is worth more than $50 billion. Now, under the Constitution, we can't spend the principal of the permanent fund, and that's the part shown in green. We can't spend the principal. We can only spend the earnings. So this money is invested in all kinds of diversified assets, and it earns money every year. And the realized earnings that it earns, we are allowed to spend. Oh, actually, I'm going to go back and say, where did that principal come from? Here's where the principal came from. Every year, a quarter of all royalties that we get from oil and certain other kinds of minerals, under the Constitution, we have to deposit those into the principal of the permanent fund. And that's one way that principal has grown over time. 35 years of depositing part of our oil royalties in. Another way is we have taken some of the earnings out from some of the earnings and put them into the principal as inflation proofing. to keep up the purchasing power. And then at various times in the past, the legislature made quite significant extra deposits or extra contributions. And those are the ways that principal has been growing over time. And note, regardless of what happens to earnings, that principal is going to continue to grow because we're going to keep on making these mandated royalty deposits and inflation proofing, I hope. So let's talk a little bit about the earnings. The permanent fund has been earning billions of dollars in realized earnings, or what is technically called statutory net income, in most years. Okay, so it earns income every year, or almost every year, kind of like maybe personal investments you may have. The permanent fund board does a great job, and we earn a lot of money, but it's not the same every year, and it's partly dependent on what's happening in financial markets. So it fluctuates quite a bit, but the trend has been upward over time because the principal is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, if you compare the permanent fund statutory net income, same blue line that I just showed in the previous graph, if you compare it with our oil revenues, this year the permanent fund brought us more income than oil did. Our statutory net income from our investment earnings of the permanent fund brought us more than our oil revenues. Of course, our oil revenues were way down, and it was a pretty good year for investment earnings. But this is, if you think about it, the long-term trend is probably that direction, because the permanent fund is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, has the capacity to produce bigger and bigger investment earnings, and unfortunately, the long-term trend in our oil production is probably down. So how have we been using those earnings? Well, we use the earnings in two main ways, and there are formulas written into state statute. And one way that we're all familiar with is to pay dividends, okay? And the red line at the bottom shows the total amount of money that we've been paying out in dividends for more than 3 decades now. And I guess this past year we paid out $1.3 billion in dividends, okay? And then another significant way we've been using the earnings is inflation proofing, okay? And in the past, we made some special deposits to principal. Now here are the same numbers, and I've put them on the same graph as the statutory net income that I showed you before. And what I'm trying to show in this incredibly awkward and complicated graph is that in most recent years, we haven't been using all of the earnings. In other words, after we pay the dividends and after we do the inflation proofing, there's also been some earnings left over. And those are shown in that shaded area at the top. Okay, and so that is the, I guess, retained earnings in the permanent fund earnings reserve. Now, one last point. Over on the left is a graph I showed you before about this rather bleak projection going forward about the deficits we face in the general fund. But it's on the right is a comparison of our permanent fund revenues, the statutory net income, with our spending from that for dividends and inflation proofing. And you can see that on the permanent fund side, we're actually running a surplus, and we're projected to run a surplus. So if you think about our total state projected deficit, the general fund and permanent fund combined, it's less than our general fund deficit. Here's the last fact that I want to point out. Here's our fundamental fiscal problem, and it is that our oil production is falling and our population is rising. Our oil production has fallen by 3/4 from what it was at its peak, while our population has continued to grow. And it's basically going to be a challenge for us as a state to continue to do what we've done in the past, pay for most of government, based just on most of government with oil revenues, when you have declining production and a growing population. That's really our fundamental challenge. Okay, now I want to go on to part 2 of this presentation, which is considerably shorter. So I'm coming to the end. And I want to just briefly outline what I see as the choices we face going forward. And I want to emphasize that I'm not advocating any of these choices. I'm not here to preach that this is the choice we ought to make or that's the choice we ought to make. I just sort of want to outline sort of what are the actual choices we're facing. This is a review of the problem. And the problem is that if we were to continue to spend at the level that this next year's budget's probably going to be, about $5.3 billion, if we continued to spend at that level, and if we continued to use only our current revenue sources, mostly oil, we would face a large funding gap between what we're spending and our revenues, which we have to pay for from our savings reserves. But the lower the price of the oil, the sooner we will drain our reserves and the bigger the remaining funding gap will be. And you can see that if we take the Department of Revenue's projected revenues, we'd run out of savings in 2022 and be facing a $1 billion annual deficit. But at a lower price, we would run out of revenues, savings sooner, and we'd be facing bigger deficits. So which of these are we going to face? We don't know. We don't know. It could be the top row, it could be the last row. We don't know, but we need to be prepared for any of these possibilities. Or we could hope, oil prices will rise to 200 and we'll have huge surpluses. We could hope that, but I'd say we need to be prepared for the possibility of something considerably less pleasant. So we face, here are the 2 fundamental choices. When are we going to fill this funding gap? And how are we going to fill this funding gap? So let's start with when. We have been delaying in filling the funding gap. I mean, we've made progress toward it. The past few years, we've been steadily cutting spending, but we still have very large deficits. And the longer we continue to run those deficits, well, the less the immediate pain, right? If we pay for everything out of our savings, the less the immediate pain we face, and the less unnecessary pain we'll face if oil prices unexpectedly recover. And if prices go to 200, we won't have gone through all that worry. So those are some arguments for, well, let's delay. But there are some arguments for taking action sooner. Because the longer we delay, the sooner we risk just draining our reserves so we have nothing left as reserves. And if that happened, we would face drastic, immediate adjustments. But other things happen if we delay. If we don't solve, the longer we take to solve this problem, the greater the risk to investor confidence about, is Alaska a good place to invest in? Can they get their financial house in order? Or can we demonstrate, the longer we delay, the more people begin to question that. Related to that is the greater the risk to our credit rating. If we're drawing down our savings and can't seem to get our fiscal house in order, that could potentially affect our credit rating. Also, as you draw down your savings, the lower your investment earnings from those savings. If you go from $10 billion, if $10 billion in savings, which we have now, earns you significant investment earnings. And if you spend that, then you have less investment earnings. And maybe fundamentally, if we draw these savings down, then the less we're leaving for future generations when they might need them. The other part of the question is, how will we fill the funding gap? And as far as I can see, basically, if we're spending more than we're taking in, we're spending more than we have money to pay for it, well, you could say, in one way, you could say we have got 2 choices. Either we have to spend less or find new ways to pay for it. And then the new ways to pay for it either raise new revenues or use permanent fund earnings. None of these options are easy and none of them are popular. And I don't like any of them, and I'm sure most of us don't like them. They're not what you want to do, but these are only significant and practical options, some combination of those. And so I just want to very briefly just touch on some of the things you might think about as we now go into a weekend of discussing these options and as we go into a year or years of discussing them as Alaskans. Just want to offer a few quick perspectives, and I'm sure that this weekend and the years ahead will offer vastly more and more insightful perspectives than I can offer. But just here's a few things you might think about to start. So spending cuts. Well, there's really hardly anything left to cut in the capital budget, so we can't really make further spending cuts out of the capital budget. Well, if we cut the statewide operations budget, we can't cut the debt service. That's a legal obligation. And cutting the retirement contributions that we're obligated to would be very difficult. Probably a lot of people looked at those oil tax credits that have been growing and might think, well, we could cut those, but there people who look at this say that that could come at the cost of could significantly affect our future oil production. And then how about the agency operations cuts? Agency operations is the biggest part of our budget. That's where most of the cuts would have to come from, and it's hard to see how we could get significant cuts without cutting our largest agencies, which are education and early development and health and social services. How about new revenues? If you listen to Alaskans, and I've been trying to listen to Alaskans, I hear people talking about many, many different ways in which we could raise new revenues. And the Department of Revenue has produced an excellent report, which I think there are copies of it around here, and talks, explores a lot of these potential revenue options and how much money you might be able to get and other considerations. And what I would suggest to you is that every single revenue option we might talk about raises questions for us. And here are some of the kinds of questions you might think. How much money would it generate? How long would it take for it to start generating that money, and what would it cost to implement it? Who would bear the burden and actually be paying the revenues? How would it affect the economy? What are the risks of getting revenues in these new ways? Any new revenue option is going to take time to implement, and anything that you do to raise revenues, you really need to carefully study it and debate it, because the devil is in the details. Okay, so if we're going to go in one of these directions, this is something that requires a lot of thought, which is part of why what we'll be talking about. Here are just some of the new revenue options people are talking about. I just point out a few of the kinds of issues that they raise. This is by no means comprehensive. So some people are saying, well, we need to raise oil revenues, and this would certainly raise again many of the issues that we were debating last summer in the oil tax debate. And people might say, well, we should raise more revenues from our other resource revenues, like our other resource industries, like mining and seafood and tourism. We get those industries to pay more. But I think this raises a real question of what actually is the ability of those industries to generate profits and pay more taxes, and how would it affect them? And a lot of people say, well, we need to economically diversify our state, and then that raises the question, well, how? What new industries, and what is the ability of these new industries actually to address, to contribute to our fiscal situation? Some people say we could get more revenues by investing our assets in new ways so that we can earn more money, in effect, from our very significant financial assets. And a lot of ideas are being floated about ways you could do that. And of course, that raises the question about, well, how much could you get, and what are the associated risks? There's a lot of hope that we'll earn significant new revenues from an LNG project, but That's still a long time away. So I'm not sure exactly how many days you have left. We're looking. There's a lot of uncertainties about how much revenue that might be. And then, of course, there's talk about income taxes and sales taxes. And those raise questions about, well, which Alaskans would be paying those taxes? And to what extent might non-resident workers or visitors contribute to them? With sales taxes, how would that affect local governments? So that's a tiny sampling of the kinds of issues we get into as we start talking about revenues. But I want to leave you with this thought. A broad-based tax, what's that? That's a tax that most people pay. Maybe not everybody, but a large portion of the population pays. Broad-based taxes are things like sales taxes, income taxes, selective sales taxes, which are things like cigarette taxes, alcohol taxes, and license fees, and so on. We Alaskans pay much lower broad-based state taxes than residents of any other state. Much, much lower. Why? Because if you look at this graph, the blue shows how much other states raise from income taxes. Most, not all other states have income taxes. The green line shows how much other states raise from state sales taxes. Most, not all, other states have sales taxes. In fact, most other states have both state sales taxes and income taxes. And in Alaska, we have neither, and we do pay various selective taxes, but they're still very small compared to other states. Finally, I want to talk about this option of using the permanent fund earnings. If you look at the permanent fund corporation's projections for the future, the earnings, the dividends, and the fund value are all projected to grow in the future. Of course, it's the investment world's uncertain, financial world's changing, but the projections are for upward growth. And as I said before, we haven't been spending all the earnings, and we could use some earnings to pay for government and still keep or even grow dividends. I would suggest, as you think about this, the way I look at it, there's two key questions in any way we might use the permanent fund earnings. And the question one is, what's the total amount of the earnings we should use? And at the moment, we have a formula that says, well, we're going to distribute half of the average statutory net income over the previous 5 years. That's the formula we use to calculate dividends. Basically half of the average earnings, okay? So going forward, we could say, well, we'll keep that same formula. Or we could say, well, we'll distribute more than half. Or we could go to a different formula not based on the earnings, such as distributing a fixed % of market value. Then the other question is, if you take out a certain amount, what do you use it for? How much would go to dividends and how much to government? At the moment, 100% of those of the earnings we use goes to dividends, but you can think of all kinds of ideas for other ways you could do it. You could, for example, cap the dividends and use the rest for government, or you could keep dividends the same and use the any increase, say maybe increase the total amount you distribute and use that for government. Now, I'm not advocating any of these. What I'm saying is these are the kinds of questions you get into if you start talking in a practical sense about how you might use the earnings. And so finally, I would leave you, all of us, all Alaskans, with this question, because this is basically the question we face. How would you fill our funding gap? Part of our problem is we don't know how large that funding gap is. It might be only $1 billion, or it might be $2.7 billion, or even higher, depending upon what happens to oil prices. So we face this question, what are we going to do? And that's what we'll be talking about. But a lot of the conversation I have heard has been about what we don't want to do. I hear a lot of people saying, I don't want to cut this, or I don't want to cut this, or I don't want taxes, or I don't want to use the earnings. But the problem the answer we have to come up with is not what we don't want, but what we can do. What are we going to do? Because this is going to be, even if we don't address it This year, we're going to have to address it within a few years because we can't go on a finite amount of savings. And so I think this is essentially the question we're discussing and will be discussing for some time in the future. So in conclusion, this is how I'd summarize what I've said. Unless oil prices rise dramatically and unexpectedly, we're not going to have enough money to continue spending at the probable FY16 budget levels and keep paying for it with only our current revenues and our savings, because our savings cannot sustain multi-billion-dollar draws for very long. So we're going to have to adjust our spending or how we pay for it. And the only significant and practical options are further spending cuts, new revenues, or using permanent fund earnings. None of these options are easy, none of them are popular, and our choices are going to affect not just ourselves, but future Alaskans. And with that, I'm done. I wish you a great discussion. I myself am very much looking forward to hearing and listening, just like other people have talked about. We at ISER, the Institute of Social and Economic Research, are very interested in contributing as we can in helping through research to understand more about the technical details of these challenging and important choices we face. Thanks.
So that was the good news. There's something I wanted to do this time that we did not do last time when we gathered together. Last time we did not bring any of our commissioners up on to be introduced, largely because we didn't have any commissioners last time we did this, so we couldn't do that. But I'm very proud of the team that we put together. Many of them did not apply. Many of them had to be called a couple of times, tapped on the shoulder and said, it's your time to serve. But we have put together one incredible team that I just could not be more proud of. So I'd like to have the commissioners come up if you would. And I just want to have them introduce themselves so you can actually see them, and rather than just stand up and say thank you very much, because this is an incredible team of Alaskans. Somebody looked at our cabinet once and said, what are you people? And I said, we're a group of Alaskans, and I'm very, very proud of them. So, Randy, first, Commissioner of Revenue. Yep.
My name is Randy Hoffbeck, and I am the Commissioner of Revenue, and I will get to chat with you a little bit more later in the weekend, so I'll pass it on to someone else.
Good evening. My name is Larry Hartig. I'm back for another round. I've been in this job 8 years as Commissioner, Department of Environmental Conservation. I see a lot of friends in the room. Thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Craig Richards. I'm the Attorney General, now from Anchorage, originally from Fairbanks. I've enjoyed the job immensely, and I look forward to helping the rest of you solve Alaska's problems. Thank you.
I'm Sheldon Fisher. I'm the Commissioner of Administration. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
I'm Heidi Dragus. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, and I'm a graduate of UAF, the class of 2000.
I'm Pat Pitney, and I'm with Office Management and Budget, graduate 1991, and happy to be back in Fairbanks. Thanks.
Mike Hanley, it's my pleasure to continue serving as the Commissioner for the Department of Education and Early Development, graduate a couple times from UAA.
Good evening, Gary Folger, Commissioner for Public Safety, and it's my honor to serve, so thank you.
Chris Sladek, I'm the Commissioner of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development. Spent the last 14 years in Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, and I'm one of the ones that didn't ask for the job, but happy to be here.
Good afternoon. I don't want to say I'm from Fairbanks because I would be homers like Heidi and Pat, but I'm actually Ron Taylor, the Commissioner for the Department of Corrections, and I'm glad to be I was part of the corrections team, so thank you.
Mark Lucan from the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities, and the governor was kind enough to give me another chance to take a shot at this, so thank you.
Huinga nokaraluga metlamakanan slu yupiuga mamtakaitlagamiu Commissioner Health and Social Services agmungo. My Yupik names are Nokaralok and Metlamakanan. My English name is Valerie Davidson, and I have the pleasure of being the Commissioner of Health and Social Services.
Good evening. My name's Laurie Hummel. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. Unlike some of my commissioner colleagues, I didn't go to school here. I went to a service academy, so at the age of 54, I'm looking forward to my very first night in a college dorm.
Mark Myers, Commissioner of Natural Resources, PhD from here, and I used to work here.
Hi, I'm Grace Jang. I'm the Governor's Director of Communications.
Good evening. I'm Jim Whitaker. I'm the Governor's and Lieutenant Governor's Chief of Staff, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
So there's the team, or there's the top level of the team, and we have a great team. They all have support team that support them. So throughout the weekend, they'll be involved in different groups. They're not there to be any particular expert in a particular area. They will contribute, obviously, and I could not be more proud. And, you know, we never have enough time for our staff meetings, our directors. I'm a big believer in having those meetings. So when we leave here, we're going to go back to Anchorage on the train. And we're going to have 12 hours of uninterrupted opportunities for us to bond and to take what we pick up here, and they can hardly wait for this 12-hour opportunity. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Gunnar, for that presentation. Thanks to all of you who've been watching this on TV or on the web. Thanks for joining us. The live web stream will begin again tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. For those here in Fairbanks, you get a good night's sleep thinking about all the facts that Gunnar gave you. Breakfast will start here on the other side of the building at 7 a.m. The program will start at 8 a.m. sharp. If you're not here at 8 a.m., Gunnar has a quiz for you before we start. We'll start again. Thanks for being here.
This is Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans. Watch and participate throughout the event at 360north.org. Broadcast and webcast of Building a Sustainable Future, Conversations with Alaskans is made possible by support from the State of Alaska Office of the Governor.